There was a time when I thought I would never be able to squat again. I used to barely move around all day because of how much pain I was in. So a lot of people don't know, how can I learn to squat with no pain? Some people feel pain in their lower backs or in their hips or in their knees or ankles or even in their upper backs or necks. It's crazy. It's a basic human movement pattern, but it is complex at the same time, and it's important that we learn how to squat properly so that we can squat for the rest of our lives. When we're talking about squatting here, we're not talking about squatting with a bunch of heavy weight on your back. That's for weightlifters, that's for power lifters, Olympic lifters. While we can do that eventually, the goal here is to learn how to squat the way it was originally intended to be. So for humans, squatting is normally a natural resting position. Before we had all these chairs in our society, the squat was the natural resting position, and people don't really squat very much to rest. But it's important to learn how to do that and to be able to drop down into a squat and come back up whenever you want to. It's a very liberating thing when you can squat pain-free in your own body anytime you want, anytime you need. And so in this video, we're going to be discussing how can you prepare your hips to squat, because there's a lot that goes into the squat, so we're just going to focus on how can you prepare your hips. Alright, so first of all, what does the squat look like? A good one. So we're going to be down here in the squat. Notice your feet will be slightly pointed outwards, and they're going to be about shoulder width apart. So here my shoulders are. Notice the knees are in line with my outer toes, okay? And from the side, notice my lower back is strong and neutral. It's not rounded like this, okay? So you can see here that I'm just sitting here in the squat. I'm resting here. That's the goal. So we don't want any pain in the ankles, knees, neck, back, shoulders, all right? And you also want to be able to move around freely in the squat. That's all a part of it. Okay, so how do we begin to learn the squat? First of all, we need to learn the hip hinge. It's super, super important that we understand this hip hinge movement pattern. This is absolutely crucial. If your feet are just hip width apart, you hinge at the hips. My knees are bending slightly. You hinge at the hips just like you're folding your body like it's a book or a wallet, okay? My lower back has not moved, it's stayed neutral. My core is all engaged, okay? This is the hip hinge, okay? This is extremely important because when we go in the squat, we're going to initiate the movement by bending our knees and hinging at the hips at the same time, okay? So, one exercise that I like to do to warm up my hip hinge is to just do that. Bend over, and I just kind of bounce here and stretch these muscles and warm up the hip hinge. I'll do it for like 20 times usually. And that's a really good way to just simply warm up your hip hinge. Okay, so what are some exercises that we can do to improve our hip hinge, to strengthen our hip flexors, the muscles responsible for that hinge? We're gonna start by just sitting on a box or a chair. Yes, we're gonna learn the squat by sitting in a chair. And we're gonna just sit up straight with the hinge at your hips, so your thighs are at 90 degrees here, okay? Notice how my butt is not tucked under. That's not how I'm sitting. I'm sitting with a neutral spine from top to bottom, okay? So here, you're just going to lift up one knee, just like this. It's a small range of motion, but you'll really feel it here in your hip flexors. And you can just hold this here. Do this on both sides. Hold it for like 20, 30, 40 seconds, a minute long. You can hold it here. You can also do little reps. Notice how when I'm repping, my back is not being tugged around. I'm not leaning back like this. It's not an ab exercise. We're trying to isolate the hip flexors. So you're going to keep everything nice and neutral and just focus on this, okay? You can also do it with your legs straight, which is harder. You'll feel it in your quads as well. And you can also do it with your knee pointed outwards, You'll hit the hip flexors at a slightly different angle. And this is good too because when you're squatting, your knees are in an outward V shape here. So practice that. Practice your hip hinge exercise like this, just right here at this angle. And try it with your legs straight too. Okay? I really feel that. Okay, so once you get comfortable with movements like that, you can also do it standing. This is much harder. Your hips are going to want to drop in the direction of your standing leg. And so you need to activate your glutes on that side to keep your hips leveled. Okay? So here, I'm just holding it. You can do reps. This is a much larger range of motion. And you can also do it with your legs straight and out. All the different variations. You can do more dynamic reps like this. But the point is, your hips will get much more strong and stable in this position. Okay? Now, if you can't do that completely, then that's fine. The point is to just strengthen your hips around. So another fun and a little bit more challenging exercise to really stabilize your hip muscles is practicing the hip hinge on one leg, and you bend over and you touch the floor. Okay? So this movement is meant to be done slowly and very controlled. So notice how I'm hinging right here at the hips, my knee is bending slightly, I'm not locked out. My back is all neutral, and I'm really feeling it in the muscles around my hips, okay? So you can do that with both legs, and you can also hold it in different positions. Maybe you're weaker in this position, or you're weaker down lower. Practice holding it for a few seconds. So a super simple and easy test to see if you have a good hip hinge is to sit in the corner of a wall and floor. See if you can get your butt all the way into the corner. Some people can't do that. They can only make it this far. Sometimes that's a matter of tight hamstrings. If that's the case, see if you can stretch them out. But the goal is to get your butt here into the corner, and so you have this perfect 90-degree hip hinge. You can also practice some hip hinge exercises like this, where you do reps or you hold it. And that's a really good way to know if you have a good hip hinge. Alright, so a little bit more on the hip hinge. I know we're going into this really deep, but that's good because it's super important. Is the kettlebell swing. So when you do the kettlebell swing, it's basically nothing but the hip hinge. When you come down, notice it's just the hip hinge. You're letting the bell swing between your legs and you're hinging right at the hips. And when you come up, you squeeze your glutes, lock out at the knees, and you'll feel it a little bit in your hamstrings and lower back as well, but it's mostly the glutes. So hip flexors, glutes, okay? That's the motion. You can do all kinds of kettlebell swing variations, and it'll really help with your hip hinge. You can also do it with a dumbbell. Just hold it like this. It's the same thing. Okay? So if you have a resistance band like this, that would be very helpful because we're going to use it right now. If you just find some sort of stable vertical surface, you loop the resistance band around it and make sure it's at your hip height, okay? You're going to step inside. You're going to loop it right across your hips, okay? So this is going to help you learn the hip hinge movement and strengthen that movement even more, okay? So I have my kettlebell here. You can do resistance banded kettlebell swings. It's much more challenging on your balance and coordination and timing, and so you gotta be very accurate with your movement, okay? That'll really help you lock in the hip hinge a lot more. Another thing you can do here with the band is, let's say you turn to the side here. You can do your single-legged hip hinge exercises here. This is so much harder, and the resistance band is pulling you that way, and it's much harder to stay stable, but you can do it. You can also do it with the other leg in that same direction and then switch sides, of course. But this will be much more challenging, and it's a lot more fun too, so give that a try. So if you happen to have access to a GHD machine just like this, or a back extension machine, that'll work fine too. This will be very useful for right now. So we're going to just get in the machine and make sure it's adjusted properly so you can hinge at the hips right here. This is a really good movement to dial in on the GHD. Make sure you are not rounding your lower back. I'm not doing this, okay? Lower back neutral, core engaged, everything is neutral and aligned. You're just going to rep out. These are called hip extensions, so you're going to rep out hip extensions. You can also hold it here, hold it in different positions. You can also hold on to a weight plate right here at your chest, or dumbbells, however you want, wherever. Just make sure you keep your back neutral, head long, spine long, and that'll be a really good accessory exercise to dial in even more your hip hinge. So a few more stretches and exercises that we can do on a bench. You're just gonna lie back and tuck in your knees to your chest. Your back is gonna be nice and flat and decompressed here on the bench. I want you to get to know this feeling very well, of feeling your hips in this position. So your legs are gonna come up and play around with it. Notice how if you rotate your legs, if they're straight up like this, then I can't get it as high up. But if they're slightly angled out, I can go farther. And if they're angled too much, I can't, they don't go past this point. And that's important to know because everyone's hips are slightly different shapes. And so people ask all the time, how wide should my feet be when I'm squatting? You know, what should my squat stance look like? It really depends on your own hip shape. However your hips are shaped, your thighs will want to go right into the deepest part that your hips will allow them to go. So play around with that right here and then just sink into it and stretch out the muscles of your glutes and of your lower back. Next, we're gonna straighten the legs, put one foot on the floor, and you can just practice the hip hinge like this, okay? Both sides. And be careful when you're coming down, your lower back will want to hyperextend here. Make sure you keep your core engaged, keep your entire spine neutral, and just focus right here on the hip hinge. It's one of the more challenging hip hinge exercises. You can also just hold it there, okay? You can also stretch your hips like this with just one leg at a time. And another stretch that's similar to this is if you straighten your other leg and then you bend it and really try to bend it far and then sink into that. You'll feel it, a really, really nice stretch in this quad here and in this hip flexor. You can bounce your foot up and down, and the closer you get your heel to the floor, the more of a stretch you'll feel. That's one of my favorite exercises to do to stretch the quads and the hip flexors. It feels so good. You'll really, really feel it all the way through here. If you have a partner, this is a great stretch to do with a partner. They can press your knee down a little gently, and they can help you pull your ankle closer to your butt. And so you can just get a much deeper stretch there. This is phenomenal. We've been working the hip flexors a lot, so you want to make sure you stretch them out and take good care of them. Make sure you don't hyperextend your lower back here. The reason you have your leg pulled in this stretch is because if it's not, your hips are just going to rotate all the way this way, and that's a problem. So you want to keep it up so your hips stay up and you can actually do the stretch properly. So obviously there are tons of different hip stretches you can do. I'm just going to show you a couple more and then we'll call it a day. So you have your knee put up here, foot on a bench or a chair, 90 degrees here, 90 degrees here, 90 degrees at your hip, okay? All you're going to do is you're going to open your hip up like this, okay? We're stretching the adductors, the muscles of the inner thigh, Stretch, squeeze, stretch, squeeze, stretch, squeeze. Do that 10 to 20 times. It's a really nice warm-up for the hips. You can also drop your torso down like this. Do that another 10 or 20 times. Really feel the muscles working here. Don't just go through the motions. You want to actively stretch and contract the adductors. And then we can go the opposite way. Stretch adductors, contract, and twist your torso up towards your knee. Try and get your shoulder down low. Make sure your butt is sticking out and you're doing the hip hinge. Keep your core all engaged to protect your spine. Do that on both legs, obviously. And it's a super nice warm-up for the hips. So there's the video. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if this helped you. In the future, we're going to be going deeper into the squat. Yes, even deeper. We'll talk about how to prepare the knees, the ankles, and then we'll kind of put it all together. Whether you're recovering from an injury or you just have never really learned how to squat properly before, or maybe you only have experience squatting heavy weight. Now you're going to learn how to squat and actually use it as a resting position and squat more throughout the day. Share it with a friend if you know that maybe they struggle with a squat, or maybe they're recovering from an injury, or maybe they just never learned how to squat in the first place because, you know, we never really learn how to do it. We're so natural as little kids and then we kind of forget. So let me know what you think. Comment below if you have any questions or comments. I wish you the best on your fitness journey. And remember, you have a choice. Choose to be fit. Surprise! I know you thought the video was over, but I just wanted to share one last thought with you guys. Some of you probably don't know this, but I used to have a lot of joint pain. I suffered with chronic joint pain for 3 years of my teenage life, between 2012 and 2015. And so I really know what it's like to not be able to move freely and struggle with so much pain. There was a time when I thought I would never be able to squat again. I used to barely move around all day because of how much pain I was in. I used to not even be able to lift my shoulder up to this height. I would limp around all day. I couldn't walk. It was just a really hard time for me. And I got through it. And part of what really helped me to get through that was I started teaching myself how to move properly again. And so I don't know what place you might be in, but wherever it is, I want to be here to encourage you, be that hopeful voice, be your cheerleader, to let you know that it is possible. No matter what pain you might be suffering, any injuries, or wherever you're starting out at, you can make tons and tons of progress, and it's so amazing what the human body is capable of.